Good morning. Happy Monday, fellow crafters. How you doing today? That was a long musical lead up. Am I wrong about that, or is it only me that it feels really long to have 5 minutes of waiting? Anyway, that's what we had this morning for our lead up. So, welcome to Monday Morning Makes. Every Monday morning, I do a little YouTube live show with tips and hacks, usually geared toward quilting or sewing. And if you enjoy those sorts of things or watch my show and like the kind of tips that I present, I encourage you to like or subscribe or punch the little bell at the bottom of the screen. And what the bell does is will give you a notification whenever I'm going live. But generally it's Monday morning at 8:30 here on YouTube. So today, the little tip I'm going to show you is making a perfectly matched seam. For quilters, we would usually use this for the backing of a quilt, but of course you may use it in sewing too, or even for borders on a quilt, but that's going to be our topic for today. But before I launch into that topic, a couple things I want to tell you about. And one is there's a virtual quilt show coming up that is sponsored by Gamble, and it begins November 9 and runs through the 15th. And what it is a virtual quilt show that basically you can attend from the comfort of your home, but it has all the features of a walk-in quilt show. So there's a vendor mall that you can shop in. There's all kinds of classes. There's lots and lots of quilts to view. You have an opportunity to vote on the quilts in their various categories. So I really encourage you, if you've got a bit of time starting November 9, log into the show. It's absolutely free to attend. Everybody is welcome to vote. The ribbons are awarded based on the popular vote, right? So your vote matters, even in quilts. So I encourage you to go on and do that. And of course, there are tons and tons of classes available, and they are, you do need to pay for the classes, and it depends on their length. I think they begin at 90 minutes, and some of them are twice that or 3 times that, depending on the type of class that is offered, whether it's just a lecture or hands-on, that sort of thing. So I'm offering a couple of classes there, and one of them is, because I love freehand quilting, right? So one of them is called Freehand Freedom, and it is a 3-hour class, and it is hands-on. So there we talk about different designs and work through them, and then there's opportunity for you to quilt them out, and then we have discussion back and forth, and it is live. So I'll be doing that live, and it's completely interactive. That's one of them. Another is called Treasure Hunt, and it has to do with one of my other loves, which is bringing to life quilt tops or quilt blocks that have been pieced in the past 50, 75 or more years ago, and completing the quilts, honoring the original maker and completing the quilt. So I have tons and tons of tips about cleaning the fabrics or identifying repairs that need to be made or how to put them together, ideas for quilting, all kinds of stuff. And that one's called Treasure Hunt. And then I have a new class this year called Innovative Marketing for long arm quilters, particularly. Just a lot of ideas for ramping up your business, for increasing your visibility, for drawing in clients outside of your immediate locale, those sorts of things. So lots and lots of ideas. I'm really excited about that one. So all of that is at the virtual quilt show sponsored by Gamble. And of course, there are tons and tons of other teachers there too. So whatever your quilting interest, whether you're beginner, intermediate, advanced, there is something for everyone. I'm taking classes too because there are other quilters that have niches and skills far beyond my own. And so I'm going to take some classes as well. I'm always excited to learn from other quilters. There's lots and lots to be learned. So without further ado, let's leap into today's topic, which is making a perfectly matched seam, especially for the backing of a quilt. But as I mentioned, you could certainly use it in the case of borders. You might even use it in garment construction. I'm not sure. But let's have a look at a picture here. This is my fabric that I'm matching up. And here I've just got a piece of it laying on top of another piece. And this is my general idea of I'm going to match up these dolphins, right? This makes a good place to line up my fabrics. And I should mention here, if you're doing this for the backing of a quilt, something that's really important to know is the size of the repeat of the fabric. So in the case of mine that I'm using, it was quite a large sort of aquarium scene. And the repeat, so where these dolphins would repeat, where the exact picture would repeat again on the fabric was actually 23 inches. So when I purchased the fabric, I calculated how much I needed for my backing plus my usual excess of 8 or 10 inches. Plus, I added the 23 inches of that fabric repeat because you don't know how much you'll have to move them up and down to get them to line up. So whatever the fabric repeat is, it might be as little as 2 or 4 or 6 inches. 23 is a really big one, but I did need to purchase that additional fabric to be sure I had enough room to match up my print and still have a long enough piece of backing. So that's really important if you're using this for a quilt backing. So now I've got my idea. I'm going to line up my dolphins. That's where my seam is going to meet. So in this picture, it's a wee bit difficult to see because my ironing board cover is a print also, which is on the left side. But all I've done is on my top piece, I've ironed back right down the middle there. You can see I've just ironed about a 1/2 inch fold. Can be a little more, but I wouldn't go huge because you don't want it too big to handle, right? So up to about 1 inch, just iron a nice straight crease all along the length of your back. Now I've flipped that fold over, so now it's flipped under on the piece that you see on top, right? That little piece that's got a selvage edge. I've got my 1/2 inch crease pressed under there, and I'm just lining up now my fold on top of my other flat piece of fabric where the dolphins are and just matching up those prints. And this, just hang on a second, make an adjustment here. This is my secret weapon. It is a tiny little glue bottle. It's about 3 inches tall, maybe 4, including the needle on the end. And I've got a pin in the end so you kind of get an idea of the size of the little needle-nosed applicator. It is very tiny, but it is perfect for drawing a bead of glue on fabric. And here is the secret about it. Elmer's glue is completely, as they advertise, it's completely washable. So it's perfectly safe to use on fabrics. Now, if you're working with fine fabrics such as silk that are not necessarily washable, that's a whole other thing. But for these purposes, we're just talking about quilting cotton, right? So Elmer's glue is perfectly safe to use on quilters cotton because it will wash out. So don't be alarmed when, as you're working with it through this process, it feels a bit stiff because of the addition of glue into the fibers. That will completely wash out and disappear from your quilt. So don't panic about that. So this is my tiny little bottle of Elmer's glue. I suppose you could use just a school applicator, use the regular school bottle. That dispenses quite a large bead of glue. So if you don't have a needle-nosed applicator like this, maybe an option would be to put a little puddle of glue on a plate and apply it with a toothpick or something like that so you get a fairly fine bead of glue because it doesn't take much. And here too, you see my needle in my pin in the applicator. I keep it like that to keep the applicator from closing or drying when I store my glue bottle, but my pin also reaches all the way through the neck of that applicator. So if I ever need to clear it out, I just run that pin in and out, and I've never had trouble with my glue bottle getting stopped up over time. Okay, so here I've folded up my creased area of fabric and I've drawn a little bead of glue on there. It looks big in my picture, I know, but it's a pretty fine bead of glue. That's all you need along that edge. And now I've placed it back down in its place and you see my iron there. It's critical that you iron it. Either that or you would have to leave it sit for an hour or more to dry because just the wet glue will not hold it in place, right? It will completely move out of your areas. So you need to press it with a hot iron. Doesn't need steam, but just with a hot iron to set and dry that glue quickly. And here I've gone to my sewing machine to sew it. I've opened up the crease and I'm just sewing exactly down that crease. Now, something I don't think I took a picture for to show you, but I'm going to tell you, is I usually open it at this point and I place pins every 6 inches or so. If you were doing something small like a border, that glue would hold it perfectly satisfactorily, but when you're working with the backing of a quilt and it's quite big and heavy and unwieldy and you're shifting large bits of fabric, right? Just gluing it and pressing it is apt to come apart when you come to the sewing machine. So I just reinforce it by flipping the fabric back exactly as you're seeing it here. And I just put a pin across that seam about every 6 inches or so. That just reinforces it. So the pin is doing sort of the heavy lifting of holding the two layers of fabric together. The glue is what's keeping my picture exactly lined up. So that's why I use both. And here is the sewn seam, and I'm just showing you that I'm pulling up that seam allowance. This is where the glue was. And certainly you could just trim the seam allowance and press it to one side and you wouldn't need to fuss with it at all. But I prefer to press my seams open on the backing because they're flatter. You don't feel as much of a ridge. So I'm literally lifting where I had that seam allowance glued, lifting it away and pulling away that glued contact. And then I trimmed my seam and pressed it open. You can see at the bottom, I've got the seam allowance showing, and I just trimmed it to about 3/8 of an inch, a little bit more than 1/4. I just feel like that's stronger on the backing. And at the top, you're seeing my matched seam. And I see now when I look at the turtle's flipper, you know, it's a thread or two off. I could be more finicky about that. But if you've ever tried matching a seam just by pinning it and sewing it and then turning it over and then undoing a bit and redoing it and then undoing another bit and redoing it over and over, which is how I used to do it, that's a hair puller for sure. This was the first try. This is without any adjustments. That's how close I got it, just with the little glue on the fold. So Elmer's glue, that's my secret weapon for matching a seam, and it works fabulously. So this was for the back of a quilt, so I did the entire length of an 85-inch quilt just with Elmer's glue and pins and one try at sewing the seam. That's all it took. So I hope that is helpful for you if you're trying to match the seams on the back of a quilt. It certainly makes a very polished look when you've got a picture that would otherwise look very offset if you did not match the seams. So hope that works well for you, and you guys let me know how it turns out. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the little bell button to see future YouTube videos. And don't forget to browse in the virtual quilt show starting November 9. Hope to see you there. I'm Susan Smith. See you next time.